Let me start off by saying tonight I'm going to inadvertently offend some people with what I say. And I say that in all honesty, that some of the things I will say, some of you will disagree with, and some of you will disagree with very, very passionately, but hopefully not violently. And I say that because in a country like ours, we can offend, so long as it doesn't go over the boundaries to violence. And I have a view, as you said during the introduction, I am a non-believer. In fact, I go further than that. I passionately disbelieve in the existence of God, which a lot of you will find uncomfortable, because many of you passionately believe in the existence of God. The reason I disbelieve in the existence of God is because of a series of events that have happened to me during my life. One of which, as a young lawyer, we had to defend the Catholic Church priests against the civil claims for the sexual molestation they did to small children. After they were found guilty in criminal courts, then came the civil claims, and we would sit as their lawyers acting for Catholic Church insurance and talk to these men. And as their lawyers, they would be open with us. And we would say to them, this boy has said that you did this, 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 and this to him. And the priest would say, yes. And we also did this, 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 and this. The most disgusting and despicable things you can think of. And when you ask them, how does this reconcile with your religion? They would say, as good Catholic priests, it's okay, we confessed, and therefore my sins were absolved. I find that sort of institutional denial disgusting, absolutely and completely. A second thing that happened to me a few years later is I was in Rwanda after the genocide of the 1990s. And I stood in a church in Nyatarama outside Kigali with 3,500 rotting human corpses at my feet. And some of you may have seen death in your life, and those of you who have seen mass death, you remember the vision hurts, but what stays with you is the smell. And the smell of death is very close to the smell of love, that musky smell, but death has a pain that goes with that musk, and it burns the back of your nostrils. And when I recount the story now, the back of my nostrils burn as they did that moment in the church. And I looked around at these 3,500 rotting human corpses, and on the top was a baby's head, not a body, just the head, with eyes that looked at me, accusing, why did you let this happen? Because of course we knew in advance of the genocide in Rwanda. We had a fax from General Dallaire, the commander of the peacekeeping force, that asked for a few thousand more soldiers, and the UN said no. And the genocide took place. And I remembered what theologians told me when I was young and saying, God is all-powerful and benevolent. And I stood in this church and I thought, if God is all-powerful and this baby's head ended up on the top of 3,500 bodies, then he's not benevolent. And if he's benevolent and this happened, then he's not good and he's not all-powerful. Now, I know many of you, and probably all of you in this audience, will disagree with me, but one of the great things about Australia, and you're right to say that we are in the luckiest country of the world, is I can stand in front of you and tell you that I do not hold the belief that you hold. In fact, I hold almost the opposite belief that you hold. But that doesn't mean I disrespect you or respect you any less. In fact, I look at your faith and the faith that you hold, and I give you respect for doing so. And the only thing I ask in return is the respect for the belief that I have. And in this culture, we do that. We allow people to hold different views, with only one proviso, that we respect others, so long as they respect us as well. For we do live in a lucky country, and this is the world's most livable city yet again. And I often say to Australians, Australia is either number 1 or number 2 on the Human Development Index according to the United Nations. We keep swapping places with Norway. And Melbourne is the world's most livable city. Let me phrase that another way. the world's most livable city in the country that is either number 1 or number 2 on the Human Development Index. Isn't that the best example of humanity on the face of the earth today? Is there any other place on earth that's better to live than the world's most livable city in the number 1 or number 2 country in the world according to the Human Development Index? In fact, I go even further than that. I can make it even more precise. The best place in the world isn't just Melbourne. It is slightly north of Brunton Avenue and slightly west of Punt Road, in that big round stadium, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it literally. A little while ago, I was with 30 Indonesian diplomats in the MCG, watching a game of football. Mighty Magpies beat North Melbourne, something the Mighty Magpies haven't been doing too much this year. And I said to these Indonesian diplomats, if you really want to understand Australia and understand Melbourne and understand our culture, look what happens at the end of the game. We have a whole lot of people in the stadium passionately supporting one team or the other. And one team will win and one team will lose. And when we leave, unlike Britain, our supporters are not divided up by who they barrack for. Unlike Britain and Europe, we don't have lines of policemen outside the stadium keeping supporters apart. We see the mix of people together, celebrating a great sporting game where half the people are happy and half the people are sad. And not only that, where else in the world can a 14 or 15-year-old girl turn up to mum and dad and say, hi mum, hi dad, I'm going to a mass public event with 100,000 people and no adult supervision. And mum and dad say, see you when you get home, dear. Next time you go to the MCG, have a look at how many teenagers are there unsupervised by adults. And if something were to happen to one of them, how many of the people would come to their defence in the crowd? This is what I love about Australia, what I love about Melbourne. We can disagree. We can passionately hold different views about politics and religion, and we can respect each other and still do so. This, indeed, is a lucky country. But something happened last week to me that reminded me of some of the differences that we face. I had a friend contact me on LinkedIn. She's Australian. She currently lives in Mexico City and was in Melbourne visiting. And she said, come on Andrew, you're influential. I've just been in Melbourne. I'm shocked. All those Asian restaurants, it's like we're being taken over by Asia. It's a dirty city. There were beggars on the streets. It's horrible. And I'm like, you live in Mexico City and you're trying to tell me my city is dirty and we have beggars in my city. Where are your eyes? And she said, we need to protect our culture from them. We, us, are being impacted. And she was meaning Asian people, Southeast Asian people. And I wrote back and I said, I hate to say this to you, but you're racist. And she emailed back, I'm not racist, I'm just scared for our culture and the threat that they are imposing. And I said to her, look, I've known you for a number of years, but to be frank, I'm going to take you off my LinkedIn and I want absolutely nothing to do with you again. Because I have lost my tolerance for intolerance. I'm now completely intolerant of intolerance and I will call it out. Her views were racist. And I hate to tell her, because she also said the normal stuff you read in the Herald Sun, all those foreigners, particularly the Asians, they're pushing housing prices up. Even though we've had a government inquiry that shows that's not true. Even though that's more to do with general population growth, economic growth, the fact that we've gone nearly 30 years without a recession. But what she was looking for was someone to blame for her fear. And maybe it's not racism. Maybe it is just looking for an outlet for fear. And maybe Brexit, Donald Trump, and Stop the Boats are all symptoms in the US, United Kingdom and Australia of the same thing, where there are people who are feeling uncomfortable. People who are forgetting that we are in the best place in the world to live, the world's most livable city in the best country in the world. And sometimes we forget, perhaps, that poverty is a driver of fear. And poverty is not an absolute notion. With very few exceptions, poverty is a comparative notion. You will feel poor if people around you are richer than you, or you perceive people around you to be richer than you. Here's some interesting statistics. If you have access to drinking water on demand and electricity on demand, you are in the wealthiest 20% of people in the world, even if you live in a homeless shelter. If you have electricity, water, and have done all 6 years of primary school, you're in the wealthiest 5%. If you have electricity and water and have done all 6 years of secondary school, you're in the wealthiest 1%. And if you have electricity and water and have done tertiary education, you're in the wealthiest 1/2 of people in the world. But how many people feel that? How many of the protesters that were protesting for Occupy Wall Street and saying, we are the 99, not the 1%, how many of them realised actually they were the 1%? Because we actually forget in our societies, in countries like Australia, how rich we are. Because we see people richer than us and we think we're poor. And when we see people richer than us, we fear being left out. We fear being left behind. And when we fear, we need someone to blame for that fear. And whether that's Mexicans, where we need a wall that Donald Trump wants, whether it's Europeans, so we vote to leave Europe, or whether it's refugees, so we put thousands of people in offshore detention and somehow we think that is okay by our culture to do so. Maybe it's not racism, maybe it's fear. I said earlier I'm going to offend, and maybe I'm going to offend with a little story that I told, because I started to really understand, as best a foreigner can, some elements of Islam and some elements of Islamic life from spending a lot of time in the Middle East. And I spent a lot of time in Pakistan particularly, a country I grew very fond of. When the massive earthquake hit Pakistan in 2005, I was sent as part of the UN response team to deal with that earthquake and ended up staying 2.5 years. I was effectively seconded into the office of the Vice Chief of General Staff of the Pakistan Army, a guy named Major General then, Lieutenant General on retirement, Nadeem Ahmed. And Pakistanis, to a fault, when they accept you as a friend, they forget you're a foreigner. So I got sent places to do things that no foreigner should ever be allowed to do in a country. I was going up to the military officer training facility in Abbottabad, about 500 metres from where Osama bin Laden was living. If only we knew that at the time, I'd be $30 million richer. And I went in with a guy named Brigadier Akhtar Waraich. We pulled up to the gate and the gate was closed, as they are in military facilities, and the poor corporal leans in the window and sees the brigadier and says, "Sir, you can't come in." The brigadier says to the corporal, "I'm a brigadier, you're a corporal, I can come in." "Oh, but sir, no foreigners are allowed here." And Brigadier Waraich looked at me and he said, "He's not a foreigner, that's Mr. Andrew. Now open the gate and let us in." The degree of compassion, the degree of familiarity and friendship in Pakistan was incredible, and one of the things that I learnt in Pakistan was the difference between a Saudi and a Pakistani, inshallah. Because we're sitting in a meeting one day and the Saudis had promised 30,000 transitional shelters to the people of Pakistan for a town called Balakot post-earthquake. And these things would never turn up. And we're sitting in a meeting one day and the Saudi ambassador's there with a couple of generals, and the Saudi ambassador turns to the generals and says, "Sirs, I promise these shelters will come, inshallah." And he left the meeting and I started laughing, and the generals looked at me and they said, "What's so funny?" I said, "I finally figured out the difference between a Saudi inshallah and a Pakistani inshallah." And they looked at me and said, "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, "Well, it's simple. When a Saudi comes in and says, 'I will do this for you, inshallah,' it means I am not going to do this unless God makes me. And a Pakistani says, 'I will do this for you, inshallah,' it means it's going to happen unless God stops me." So every time then in a meeting in the future and someone said, "I will do this for you, inshallah," people would look and say, "Saudi or Pakistani?" I spent some time a couple of years ago in North Korea. And North Korea was impressive, not in a approval sense, but in a sense that it left an impression. And the impression that North Korea left was this: people only can make a choice, can only make a decision, can only have an opinion if there are two or more pieces of information in front of them from which to choose. If people only have one piece of information, there's no choice, there's no decision, there's no opinion. There is only a fact that you've been given, and that fact is indisputable and undeniable. So if you had an opinion poll in North Korea today, people would freely say they are the best country in the world because they only have one piece of information. And they would freely say the North Koreans would beat the United States in a war. And they believe that because they only have one piece of information. It's the single largest danger we have in humanity is if we're only given or only believe one piece of information. And I want you to think about that context in the next few things that I say, because North Korea today is the ultimate example of when people only have one piece of information. Back in 2006, I turned 40. And for those of you who are good at mathematics, that will remind you that shortly I'm about to have a very big birthday. I'm looking forward to it because I've been saying for years I'm nearly 50. It explains the pains when I wake up. But when I was turning 40, I had a young intern working in my office. I will call her Amaras. I won't say what her real name was, and the reason will become obvious in a moment. And she drew me this beautiful picture for my 40th birthday. A still life fruit bowl. It was lovely. And it still sits in a frame above my desk at home. And we were chatting in those sorts of ways where you normally talk, and I asked her, I said, what do you want to do with life? She was from one of the universities in Islamabad helping us in the earthquake relief. And she said, oh, I want to be a suicide bomber. Oh, I said, why? And she explained her reason to me, and I'll come back to it in a moment. And then she said something which was frightening and lovely at the same time. I asked her, how would you feel if I died in your attack? And she said, Andrew, I'd be really sad. I'd be sad not because you died. I would be sad because you're a non-believer. And because you're a non-believer, it means you will go to hell. I will go to paradise, she said. And I really like you. And I would like to spend paradise with you. But I can't because you're a non-believer. And in a really funny way, it was probably the nicest thing someone has ever said to me. I'm going to kill you, but I would like to spend all of eternity with you. It was a really bizarre dialogue. But Amara came from this background where she was an only child, which in Pakistan is incredibly unusual. And she was brought up by a single parent, which is also incredibly unusual. And the parent that brought her up was her father. And that meant in a culture where there are very distinct gender roles, she had no access to the female culture. So her life looked miserable. The chance of her getting married was very small, and raising a family, and all of those things. So when she, at the age of 19, looked forward on the rest of her life, she could only see misery. Now, people will say suicide bombers are crazy and terrorists are idiots. And I like to say, well, in a strange way, that's not right. Because if you're given a piece of information and you believe that piece of information, let's now start and unfold a couple of pieces of information. She was given a piece of information that God exists. Many, if not all of you, agree with that. And in fact, most Jews, most Muslims and most Christians believe God exists. One of the things I learned in Pakistan was how much better Muslims understand the interrelation between Judaism, Christianity and Islam than many Christians and many Jews do. And one of the reasons for that is, in many ways, Islam builds upon the other two. I sometimes generalize, and now what I'm going to say will almost certainly offend people. I say, which religion you are depends on your view of Jesus Christ. If you believe Jesus was a teacher, then you're a Jew. If you believe he was a prophet and not just any prophet, but the second most important prophet, then you're Muslim. And if you believe he was a Messiah, you're a Christian. Because almost everything else comes from the same basis. The God of Abraham, Allah. It's the same God. I don't care what a guy named Jim Bob in southern United States tells me. Oh, Muslims don't believe in God, they believe in Allah. I'm sorry, Allah is God. It's just a different language word. But we believe in the God of Abraham. Believe in Moses and the Ten Commandments. It's common to the religion. Then there is differences, and then there are different interpretations, and I won't go into that in any further difference. But the essence of the religions are the same. And more Muslims, in my experience, than Christians and Jews understand the interaction between those three. Because the Torah is respected as a religious text in Islam, as is the New Testament. The reverse is not necessarily true. So if you have this piece of information that God exists, and you believe that, and you believe there is a heaven, there's a paradise, and you believe if you follow a certain code of conduct, you will get access to heaven or paradise. If you believe those things, and so far, every true believing Jew, Muslim and Christian will believe in that. God, code of conduct, and heaven. Then it's entirely logical to follow that code of conduct. Not only that, it's entirely logical to put behaviour that gets you in heaven in front of behaviour that gives you a reward in life today. Because if you believe in eternity, and you believe in heaven, and you believe in God, what's more important, your short term of life on earth or life in eternity in heaven? Any logical analysis tells you that life in heaven for eternity is more important than your life on earth today. That's logical. And then if someone teaches you of a shortcut to get to heaven, it's entirely logical to follow that shortcut. And if your life is miserable, and you think all of your life is miserable, and someone offers you a shortcut to get into heaven, and you believe that, then it's entirely logical to follow that shortcut. And if someone has taught you to be a suicide bomber is a shortcut to heaven, and you don't have any other information, and you have nothing else to believe, then it's entirely logical to follow that path. It's not crazy, it's not stupid, it's just, in my view, misguided. And the teaching that you've been given is wrong. And the person that has betrayed you is the person that has taught you that. So if you're in a position of someone like Amara, and your life is horrible, and you don't see a future, and you think there's a shortcut to go to heaven by blowing people up, what is the logical thing to do? Fortunately, she hasn't blown herself up. And she hasn't blown herself up because she got a job with a large American-based multinational who sponsored her to get a master's degree in the United States. Hence why I don't use her real name, because she's in San Francisco today. And if I used her real name, I think some nasty guys in a blue uniform will come and knock on her door in San Francisco, and I wouldn't like her dressed in the colour orange. But the lesson I take from that discussion with Amara is this. There are a three-stage response I think we need to take to counter extremism, to counter terrorism. And they all come back to some of the stories that Amara faced. One, we need to counter the teaching of the shortcut to heaven. The teachers, the preachers, the priests, the religious people who say there is a shortcut to heaven by taking other people's lives are wrong. There is nothing in any religious text that justifies the killing of children. There is nothing in any religious text that justifies the murdering of innocent people. So one thing we must all do together is counter that narrative that's wrong. That's hard. It's a multi-generational process of education, which is linked with the second thing. We need to remove the incentive for people to end their life on earth early. You're only going to be inspired to blow yourself up if life on earth isn't, in your mind, worth living today. And if you believe in God and you believe in heaven and you're enjoying your life today, you can wait 60 years to see God. and then when your life reaches its natural course and you die, you go to heaven. Why short-circuit it? Why go there quicker? Live your life, honour your belief, and then go to heaven, if that's what you believe. But you need to make life worth living. And now comes a really big challenge. If people feel life is not worth living because they feel poor or dispossessed or disempowered, then how do we counter that? By giving people comparative wealth, worth, and empowerment in their lives. That's a big challenge. It's a challenge in the northern suburbs of Paris. It's a challenge in the western suburbs of Belgium. It's a challenge in some areas of Melbourne. It's an enormous challenge in Afghanistan and Iraq and some places of Pakistan, where life, as many of you know, is so miserable that if you could be given a shortcut to heaven, who wouldn't take it? But that's a real challenge. And then add on to that the increased incentive that comes if you've just seen some of your family killed because of a drone strike. And that's an ongoing challenge, because now we get to the third thing that links to the second. Even while we're doing an education program to show the error in people believing there's a shortcut to heaven, and even while we do work to increase the economic empowerment of people across the world, we still need to have an incredibly strong security apparatus to respond to people that might want to blow themselves up. We do need a security apparatus to stop them. But what happens when that security apparatus is in tension with encouraging other people to become suicide bombers? The collateral damage. There is a legitimate question to say, if I can strike a terrorist who's about to kill 100 people and I kill 5 or 10 innocent people in killing that terrorist, there is a legitimate argument to say, but in killing 5 or 10 innocent people, have I just inspired more terrorism? Maybe, maybe not. And this is a very hard decision that many of the people in charge of weaponry have to make. Is this so-called high-value target high enough value to risk collateral damage, but risk the inspiration of other people being motivated into terrorism? Because I know one thing. If my friends were killed in front of me, I would want to respond to the people who killed those people. And that's a natural consequence. And it's a dilemma where all three of these things interrelate to each other. A strong education system to counter the negative narrative, a strong economic development mechanism to be able to make lives worth living for people, and a strong counter security involvement to stop people who have actually decided to undertake an act of terrorism. They are the lessons I take from that interaction with Amara, and all of them are very strong. And I said on Q&A, like the Catholic priest who molests the small child, that Catholic priest has stepped so far out of the teaching of his religion that I do not accept he's religious. I do not accept a Catholic priest who molests small children is Christian. You cannot be Christian and do that. And I do not accept a suicide bomber is Muslim. You cannot follow Islamic faith and the teachings of Islam and the Prophet, peace be upon him, and blow people up. So we can sit here all very honestly and say, these people are not Muslim who blow people up. I will say something that many Australians disagree with. Han Monis, the man who attacked and drove over people in Nice, the man who killed those people in the Orlando nightclub, all three of them were not Muslims. Those attacks were not terrorist attacks. Those attacks were attacks by madmen. I tell you what those three men had in common, other than a supposed belief in Islam. The three things those men had in common, the things those three men had in common, they all had failed relationships. They all beat their wives or girlfriends, and their wives and girlfriends rejected them. They were loners. they did have some degree or other of mental illness. I don't mean that as an outside observer, I mean they had been diagnosed to some degree or another with mental illness. Back in the late 1980s and 1990s, we had a rise in the United States of a thing called suicide by cop. Suicide by cop. That is, people who wanted to die but had no courage to kill themselves, so would kill a few people, wave a weapon around and hope that a policeman would kill them. And that happened quite a lot, to the extent that they created the name suicide by cop. What is Han Monis, or the Nice murderer, or the Orlando murderer, other than taking suicide by cop to the next step? I have lost my hope of life. I'm sick. I don't have any sense of belonging with anyone, but I know this. If I decide to kill people, but before killing people I yell, Allahu Akbar, I will be on the front page of newspapers around the world. Islamic State will claim me as one of theirs. I will be given a sense of belonging in death that I never had in life. And what do we do in the West? What do we do as normal people? We do Islamic State's work for them. We proclaim these people as terrorists. We give these people a label they do not deserve. We say these people are Muslims, and they're not, because they betray the very essence of the religion they proclaim by killing innocent people. When will we have the courage to stand up and say our media should not be allowed to name these people? We should not give these people in death a legitimacy that they never had in life. They are crazy, murdering, idiotic people that have no sense of belonging, no camaraderie, no friendship, cannot maintain an individual personal relationship with people around them. They deserve to have their name forgotten. But we give them credit in death that they never had in life, because they said Allahu Akbar. And they are not Muslim. But it's not right for us, for you, or for me to say religion has nothing to do with terrorism. Because whether we like it or not, religion is used as a motivator. Just like there are Christians in the southern United States who will blow up abortion clinics and claim God as their inspiration. Just like there are settlers in Israel that will settle Palestinian territory and claim God as their motivator. People use religion as a motivation, even if that motivation might be wrong, because they've been given a piece of information, like in North Korea, that they've got no comparison, or they give no legitimacy to the comparison. Hence why education is such an important component part to how we must work together to counter terrorism. Which then brings me to who is the us and who is the them? The thing that I really fear. What do I really fear? Back when I was in primary school, we learned about the Dark Ages, after the Roman Empire, when Western civilization went backwards. The time when Islam, or the Islamic world, invented astronomy and mathematics and the number zero. The Western world went backwards. When I was in primary school and we learnt about the Dark Ages, it made no sense to me because I could not understand, how does humanity forget knowledge? How do we go backwards? But what I fear now is not only do I understand how that happened, I see how it can happen again, and I don't know how to stop it. This is my fear, that we are reaching a global level catastrophe on the level of the Dark Ages that will happen if we're not careful in our lifetime. Because what is Islamic State fighting? What do they really hate? They hate modernity. They hate music. They hate television. They hate movies. They hate the exchange of ideas. They hate the fact that I can stand before you as a non-believer and do so in safety. And I can look at you and I can see the belief you hold and I can respect that but disagree. You can look at the belief I hold and you can respect that but disagree. That's what Islamic State hates. That's what they want to destroy. And if we set off nuclear bombs all over the world and destroyed our electricity grids and destroyed our water plants and wiped out 2/3 of the population of the planet Earth, that's what Islamic State wants. Bomb us back to the Stone Age, as some US policymakers have said. You know, when Ted Cruz said during the Republican nomination process, "I know the solution to Syria, we carpet bomb it and leave." That's no solution. That wouldn't work, but that is what Islamic State wants. How does Islamic State achieve its objective? It gets us to turn on each other. It gets us to fight our own people in our own country, in our own cultures. Because here's the thing, I'm a non-believer, but if you push me and push me and push me, and you create a war between Western culture and non-Western culture, and I have to choose sides, I'm going to go the Western culture. If I have to choose. I don't want to, but if I have to, I will. And many Muslims, many moderate Islamic people, if there were a war between Christianity and Islam, no matter how moderate you are, no matter how much you respect, if you're pushed and pushed and pushed, you'll choose Islam over Christianity. It's your belief. And that's what Islamic State wants us to do. It wants to get us to a point where we're pushed into a corner where we have to make a choice we really don't want to make. And how do they do that? They do that by encouraging an us versus them mentality, which is us Muslims against them Christians, or us Christians against them Muslims, or us non-believers against them believers. That's what they want. That's the fight that we need to push against. And when I see fear being created, like in my friend's email exchange with me about Asians coming to Australia, I say 1/3 of Australians have at least one parent born overseas, and 1/4 of them are in Asia. And most of the Asian faces you see at auctions buying houses in Melbourne were born in Australia. Because when did the first wave of Southeast Asian migration come to Melbourne? 1852. 300 metres from my house is the oldest Chinese temple in Melbourne. Melbourne has the oldest Chinatown in the world, older than San Francisco's. And we have the temerity to look at an Asian face and say, "Oh, they just came here." Chances are their family has been in this country longer than my family has. But my friend had a fear and she needed an enemy for that fear. People who support Donald Trump and his wall have a fear and they need an enemy for that fear. People who voted Brexit had a fear and they need an enemy for that fear. People in our own cultures, in our own communities, in our own countries have a fear and they need an enemy for that fear. And we need to make sure that fear does not drive us in a way that pushes us into corners that we don't want to get into. We need the us versus them to be us moderates, us who respect each other's differences of opinion, against them, the people who are intolerant, the people who have the fear, the people who have the racism. They're the them. It's us that need to work together. And unhappily, the biggest fight we may have is within our own communities. The biggest fight I have is not with you. It's with people who have a much more similar background to me, who might be atheists or agnostics or even Christians, who have a fear and are looking for an outlet for that fear, and for them it is asylum seekers, Islam and Muslims and terrorists. And the biggest fight you may have is for people within your communities who, like Amaras, are looking for an easy way out. I am not your enemy and you are not my enemy. But don't get angry at people who look like me, who fear the terrorist. As General Nadeem said to me in Pakistan, when I asked him about Islamic terrorism, he said to me, and I apologize for swearing, he said, "Andrew, these people are fucking my religion. They are making people hate my religion. They are making me hate my religion because what they're doing is wrong." Now, one stage in December 2006, Nadeem said to me, "Andrew, I need you to go to Northwest Frontier Province and to Kashmir. And I need you to get the Provincial Relief Commissioners to report to me on the contingency planning for the second winter after the earthquake. Now, for those of you who are not Pakistani, Pakistan and Australia have very, very similar constitutional structures. Australia has 6 states and 2 territories. Pakistan has 6 provinces and 2 autonomous areas. In fact, our constitution should be similar because the same damn people wrote it, sitting in London. So going to see the Provincial Relief Commissioner is like seeing the State Emergency Services Commissioner in Australia. I'm a foreigner. What do you mean I'm going to see the State Emergency Services Commissioner and get them to report to me, the foreigner? It's like a Pakistani coming up and turning up to the State Emergency Services Commissioner in Victoria and say, hey, report to me. It's like, no, go to hell. I don't report to you, you're a foreigner. But in Pakistan, no, I wasn't a foreigner. I'd been there long enough that I was accepted by them. So I went to Muzaffarabad, I went to Kashmir. And I asked the Provincial Relief Commissioner, tell me what your contingency planning is. And they gave me this wonderful presentation. Your brother was there. Your uncle was there. Gave a wonderful presentation. Very detailed about what the contingency planning was. Big tick, that's fantastic. I then went down to Peshawar. Peshawar is a very interesting place. Those of you who are from Pakistan understand that in its full length. The things you can buy in the smuggler's bazaar, you really don't want to know. And I turned up to the Provincial Relief Commissioner, but there's no one else. There were no advisors, no one else in his office, and he sat there with his long beard and his prayer hat, because he was also a very conservative cleric. And he said to me, Andrew, you're forgetting something. I said, what's that? He said, God sent the earthquake because the people were bad and he was punishing them. If the people have been good this year, this winter will be fine, so we don't need a contingency plan. If the people have been bad, God will punish them again, and who am I to get in the way of will of God? So we don't need a contingency plan. I went running back to Islamabad. It was in Ramadan. General Nadeem had his cup of tea and his biscuit, so that gives you an idea. And I said, sir, it's like he believes that God sent the earthquake. And Nadeem looked at me and he smiled and he said, Andrew, he does. I said, no. It's like he believes that God had this big red button on the desk and he pushed the button and the earthquake happened. And Nadeem looks at me and he smiled and he says, Andrew, he does. And I want you to think about it this way. You believe the earthquake happened because of tectonic plates because you read that in a book. He believed it was God because he read that in a book. Whose book is right? And I suddenly went, ooh. Because what I used to believe was an alternative belief. I believe it happened from tectonic plates. He believed it happened from God. It's belief. It's negotiable. You can discuss belief. But what General Nadeem made me realize it wasn't belief. It was a view of fact. In my mind, it was fact that the earthquake happened because of tectonic plates. Non-negotiable fact. In the Provincial Relief Commissioner's view, it was fact that it was sent by God. Non-negotiable fact. As a lawyer, and I've done a lot of times I've taught negotiating techniques with people. And I talk about the negotiating space. And the negotiating space is best summed up this way. If you're a shopkeeper and you're wanting to sell shirts, and you want to sell a shirt for as much money as you can, but no less than $10, and someone else is a consumer and they want to buy a shirt as cheap as they possibly can, but no more than $15, then we have negotiating space between $10 and $15. But if I want to buy a shirt for no more than $10, and you want to sell a shirt for no less than $15, there's no negotiating space. And the sooner we realize there's no negotiating space and walk away, the better for both of us. And between me and the Provincial Relief Commissioner in Peshawar, there was no negotiating space. So I said to Nadeem, well, what do we do now? He said, well, now we know he's not going to do anything. It's fine. And we just use the Pakistan Army and backfill and do our own contingency planning, which we did. So some very interesting lessons. There are some people in our communities that have a view of fact where there's no negotiating. It might be a redneck who hates everything because they need an outlet for their fear. It might be a fundamentalist person who proclaims a belief in Islam that may or may not be right. Might believe there's a shortcut to heaven by yelling Allahu Akbar. They're wrong, but they might believe that. They might have a view of fact that that's true. So if we are to create the us versus them, where it's us or moderates against them or radicals, we might hate it, but the biggest part of the war that we need to fight against radicals is on our own side, if I can put it this way. We need to work together to teach people about each other's cultures, but I need to stomp on the redneck because you can't. And you need to stomp on the radical Muslim because I can't. Because if you stomp on the redneck is going to say, see, I told you, the Muslims want to kill us. And if I stomp on the radical Muslim, they're going to say, see, I told you, the West want to kill us. And you might hate it, that every time a terrorist attack happens, you have to defend Islam. And you hear these idiots like Andrew Bolt. I say directly to the camera. Someone said you've only got a mark of success when Andrew Bolt criticises you, and after my Q&A appearance he did. Here he is, a middle-aged white man that spends a lot of time telling Islam how Islam should behave, criticised me for saying how Islam should behave. You're an idiot, Andrew Bolt. And these people say, when will moderate Islam condemn these terrorist attacks? And every time someone says to me, when will moderate Islam condemn these attacks, I send them a link. And you know the link I send them? www.dawn.pk. Go and read the English language newspapers in Pakistan. See what moderate Islam is actually saying. Because most of the people who say to you, when will moderate Islam speak out against terrorism, what they are saying really is, I never read anything from moderate Islam. I am ignorant about moderate Islam. That's what these people are saying. And we need to educate them. Because also, as I think I said on Q&A, it really upsets me how imbalanced we are about death. Think about after the Paris attacks. And it was wrong for fundamentalists to kill the journalists at Charlie Hebdo. It was wrong. There is no justification for that. None. For murdering those people. And what did the West do in response? Hundreds of thousands of people protested in Paris. About 20 world leaders turned up. This is wrong, and they're right. It was wrong to kill people for offending the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But a few weeks earlier, the moderate Muslims that should have been condemning the radical attacks, what were the moderate Muslims that should have been condemning the attacks doing a few weeks before? The Pakistan army, many of whom are moderate Muslims, were attacking the very radicals that we want to. They were bringing the war to the Taliban. And what did the Taliban do in response? They attacked a school in Peshawar and killed hundreds of school children and teachers, including a friend of mine. Before she died, she was dragged in front of all of the children. Her head was shaved, she was covered in petrol, and she was set alight in front of the children. And when I hear people in my community say, when is moderate Islam going to speak out against radical Islam? I tell them my friends have died in the name of moderate Islam. I tell them to go and read the Dawn. But I know those people are not going to read Dawn. I know they are not going to believe my stories. Because those people are embedded in a view of the world just like the Provincial Relief Commissioner in Peshawar. And what I really fear is those people have the power to push us in a corner we don't want to be. And by its very definition, people who are radical are much more inspired in their view than people who are moderate. And what we now need to develop is radical moderates. People who are going to passionately fight for moderation. People who are passionately going to fight for understanding. I need to fight the rednecks, you need to fight the radicals, and then we need to come together and say, how do we help each other win our fights? How do we help each other fight our war? Because if we don't win our war against radicalism, then we will radicalize. And if we all radicalize, we will have an intercultural war where no one wins, where we are bombed back to the Dark Ages, and we have another Dark Ages where our children and our grandchildren will not have the life we have now. They will not live in the world's most livable city, they will live in the world's most livable rubble. And I don't want that. We need to work together, where us is all moderates against them, which is all radicals. I thank you for listening to me tonight.